Hey, Sammy. Welcome back to Called to Be Different, Reflecting Christ. First and foremost, we're going to have to give a pregnancy update because I have been going through like an emotional roller coaster the last couple of weeks, and I could use some prayers. I'm not even going to lie. And so could baby Nolan. We're just hanging in there trying to like get to the finish line and get there safely. And lo and behold, I literally just started itching the other week. It was like all over my body, but no rash. Nothing that looked like a pregnancy, like a typical pregnancy. Oh, here's a rash and itching reasons. But one thing that I did learn about was this thing called ICP, which is basically where your liver can't keep up with the bile production, and so bile will leak into your bloodstream. And while it's not necessarily terrible for you and should resolve after you have your baby, it can be absolutely horrible for your baby. It can stress them out. It can mess with their heart rate, and it is known to actually cause stillbirths. So I was a hot freaking mess learning about this because, of course, I would end up getting a massive body itch all over my body on like a Friday. Okay, it started off really slow. It wasn't that big of a deal, but then it just kept spreading to my limbs and my arms and my legs and my feet. Not on my palms of my hands or the soles of my feet, which is apparently where ICP typically starts. But it was everywhere else. So I was very, very confused. And a little backstory, about 3 years ago, I had appendicitis. My oldest son, Aiden, got sick. And the day after he got sick, I got sick. And so the doctors thought that I had a virus. Well, so did I. But my virus didn't feel like a virus. It felt like a very painful stomach thing too. And so I had brought it up to my doctors, but it wasn't like the typical appendicitis kind of thing. And it wasn't like the same way that they describe it. And so my doctors were like, it's probably just a virus, not that big of a deal. And I got checked for appendicitis, but apparently at this time my appendix had already ruptured. And so the relief had started. It wasn't hurting as bad. And then all of a sudden I started having high fevers. And basically I got a massive infection in my stomach where my stomach like walled it off and kept me from getting septic. But through this, I had to have a couple of CAT scans. Well, during these CAT scans, on one of my reports, it actually talks about how I have a fatty liver tumor, but they said it was likely benign. Well, the doctors didn't talk to me about this. They just put like the information in, and then of course you can read your information on your charts. And so I went and read the information, and then I Googled what all these medical terms meant. And that's how I learned about this spot that's apparently on my liver that's, fingers crossed, benign. But that was a couple years ago. So I just like brushed that under the rug. But then of course, when this ICP thing comes up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have liver disease or something. Like something's going on. I don't know what's going on. Like I'm stressing out, or I'm like just thinking maybe because I have that thing on my liver, maybe it's just making it harder for my liver to process bile. I don't know. So I'm super stressed. I'm literally like taking the kids to Hobby Lobby, trying to keep my mind off of it, but I'm like bawling the whole way there. I look like a psychopath walking into the store trying to like stop crying, but anyway, so I went to my OB because I already had an appointment scheduled for Monday, and they did the ICP test, blood test, but it takes like 2 days for that to come back. So I went ahead and scheduled with my dermatologist in case it came back and said that it wasn't ICP. That way I could at least have my dermatologist look at me and say what she thought it was. And so I get my liver enzyme blood test back, which doesn't tell you about the bile, just your enzymes. And one of them's low, one of them's like right on the border. Literally, it's 13 is the lowest for the good range, and I was 13. And so basically my doctor messaged me and said everything's normal on your enzymes. And so I was like, okay, well, that's good. That's a little bit of a relief. And then the next day I had the dermatologist appointment, and that morning I woke up and I happened to just check before it even like notified me, and it said that my bile level was really low. So that's really good. That means I don't have ICP. So I'm on the way to the dermatologist. I talk to her. She looks me over. She's like, you don't have a rash. You don't have anything. But what it looks like is you're basically having an allergic reaction. You're having hives. And she's like, I don't know why. It's possibly just hormone related. You probably just have elevated hormones. Could be also the added stress that this has been adding to you. And so she gives me a topical steroid lotion that's good for pregnancy and doesn't harm the baby. And then also tells me to like basically take allergy medicine. Okay, good. Well, the itching's still here. It's definitely calmed down some. And I think just not being so stressed out has helped it to calm down. But honestly, the funny thing is, there's another thing where it's like stress points. I don't even know exactly like if there's a technical term for it, but that's what I've learned is it could be like stress points where you're like gaining weight and you got the extra blood flow and there's just so much going on in your body. And then as my dad and my husband kindly pointed out to me, Sam, you're 37. Okay. So it could just be that, you know, you're struggling with these hormone levels where you never struggled with your other babies. So I don't know what's going on, but I will gladly take some prayers. Okay, so now that I got that out of the way, let's talk about Tyndale. Have you guys ever heard about Tyndale? He is apparently a guy who, I don't know if he was a monk or just a layman. I honestly don't know. Don't shoot me. Write in the comments. Let me know. But he wanted to translate the Bible into English. The church did not want the Bible to be translated into English. They thought that it would mess up the interpretation of the scriptures. And so they condemned him and they asked the state to burn him at the stake. And that's what happened. And apparently, I had actually heard of this story when I was a Protestant. Apparently, as he's going to be martyred, he prays out loud, you know, Lord, you know, allow the king to open his eyes or something like that. And so it's not long after that. I don't honestly know exactly like how long. I don't think it was that king that was in charge. I think it was like a couple kings later. But it was King Henry VIII, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that he's the one that said, okay, yes, the Bible can be published in English. So that's what happened. Now, this gentleman just wanted to ask me, like, wow, you follow a church and you're with the Catholic Church who does this thing that condemns men and basically kills them for trying to translate the Bible. Okay, let's take 10 steps back because I just want to talk about this. Because as I'm commenting back to this gentleman and I'm saying, like, listen, the church is not ran by perfect men. It's ran by Christ, okay? And when men make mistakes, God corrects us, right? The church has never been perfect. I don't know any religion that has ever been perfect, including the Protestant religion. You know, the reformers, a lot of them, like Luther and Calvin, definitely called for people to be killed. Now, did they ever kill anyone? Not to my knowledge, but they definitely called and like wrote letters saying like, kill them, get rid of them. And so does that mean Protestantism's not real? I don't think so. It's clearly still around. But what I will say is if you're going to take that mindset, then you're not in the right church either. And therefore, I don't think any of us are following the right God because, like, all men have done really dumb things in all religions. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But as I'm commenting back to him, I just like stop in my tracks and I'm like, oh my gosh, St. Paul. Like, he was Saul. He was running around persecuting Christians, putting them in jail, having them killed. And Jesus comes to him and says, what are you doing? You're persecuting me. And St. Paul turns his entire life around and he devotes the rest of his life to preaching the good news about Jesus Christ. And so my point of that is that sometimes men think they're doing the right thing. Sometimes men think that what they're doing is good in the eyes of God. And sometimes God has to correct them. Do I think necessarily that the church, was trying to kill people for translating? No. I think what they were trying to do was to protect God's word. And they thought they were doing the right thing by getting rid of Tyndale. But God uses things for good, right? And it is such a blessing that, yes, I can read the Bible in the English language. And it's such a blessing that Bibles are being translated into everyone's language. They're still working on languages to this day. But it is still, one of those things where it's I can understand how the English can confuse people. We literally see it with Protestantism. The English translations and how we speak in English versus how they spoke in Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic, it does not always add up, and it doesn't always make sense, and it can bring a lot of confusion. That's why you really need to go get a concordance, and you really need to look up these things. But that's not even necessarily good enough, because some of it is so confusing and so deep, and how does that work and what does that mean? Even though you can read oh, this is the word it could mean. Well, it can mean a couple of different words for a lot of different things. So my point is that should we run away from the church for men being in the church who aren't the best or who aren't perfect? No. If we did that, we would always leave, because there's always going to be a Judas. Somewhere in the church, there's going to be a Judas, okay? But ultimately, we rely on God. We rely on his promise that he's going to lead the church into all truth and that he will be with us until the end of the age. We rely on that, and that's where we stand. So is the Catholic Church not true because men make bad decisions? No. If that was the case, no church would be true. No religion would be true. So I just wanted to throw that out there to anybody who has possibly heard that. And yeah, I don't know what it is, you want to defend and you want the church to look its best. Absolutely. But, at the same time, it's I can't sit here and deny that didn't happen. I can't sit here and try and brush it over like some people will do. They'll be like, oh, well, that was because of this. I honestly was just trying to say men suck. What's your point? But of course, the Holy Spirit's always good, and he always gives me wisdom when I need it. And when he said St. Paul, I was like, that makes a lot of sense, Lord. That's why I have to come to you, because my own understanding is always so minuscule compared to yours. So anyways, just something to chew on. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.